Welcome to The Final Cut, the show where film and television meet expert insight and passionate discussion. Hosted by Professor John Cook, Emeritus Professor of Media, Film and Television at Glasgow Caledonian University, and Charlotte Buren, amateur filmmaker and devoted cinephile, The Final Cut brings fresh perspectives to everything on screen. Each episode explores the latest releases, iconic classics, and the trends shaping the world of storytelling through spirited debate, academic depth, and a shared love for the art of film and television. Whether you're a seasoned critic or just here for the drama, this is your place for screen talk that cuts deeper. This is The Final Cut.
Welcome back to another episode of The Final Cut, the show where we discuss the latest in film and television. Today, we're going to talk about the White Lotus, and in particular now season 3, and maybe a bit also focus on the final episode. So it has been an interesting season, and all of them has a sort of, all of the shows have a sort of similar theme. It's always the affluent American or affluent people from various worlds that come and visit these White Lotus resorts. And it has a bit of a sort of upstairs, downstairs theme to it, whereby the guests who sometimes have certain negative characteristics, perhaps, are visiting the sort of very polite staff, and the same obviously in this episode, and in this season it's set in Thailand, in Koh Samui, at one of their wealthy White Seasons resort, and we are invited in to see various guests coming. And for this discussion today, we have dressed up appropriately in White Lotus style fashion, and as you can see, our background here is mirroring. And so we are presented with, it's certainly 3 families or people from 3 parties that are coming in. And for example, for the first, we have the Ratcliffe's family, which is a wealthy Texan family who Tim Ratcliffe is bringing his whole family, and they have this sort of Dallas appeal, kind of wealthy family, and his daughter is interested in Buddhism, which is the pretext for going to Thailand. And we have the girls, which is 3 girls who obviously were students together and now have a reunion here in Thailand. And we also have Rick and Chelsea, which is part of a sort of 2 kind of odd couples, whereby he is kind of an older man who has then found this younger woman that he has brought over to Thailand, and he is here in this pretext to show Thailand, but actually it's more of solving a sort of family dilemma. And we have the final couple with Greg and Chloe, where we know Greg is hiding secret, but he's also hiding it from Chloe, and again under the pretext of having a lovely romantic trip in Thailand. So overall, I thought it was a great episode. It was a great season. I think actually a lot stronger than season 2. I think I loved season 1, and I think this is on par or even better than season 1. And it's an interesting showing kind of a traditional format, but it had an interesting twist and turn to it. But moreover, so with me here today, obviously, I am joined by my co-host, Professor John Cook, who is Emeritus Professor in Film and Media. So what was your feeling about season 3 and the White Lotus?
Well, hi, Charlotte. Welcome everybody to this podcast on the White Lotus season 3. You'll see that we're all dolled up in our Thai gear here, appropriately for the show. So what did I think? Well, because I hadn't really seen the previous seasons, I came to this fairly raw and new to it. I'd seen a little bit of season 1, but I'd literally missed the boat with season 2. So I actually enjoyed it and enjoyed the experience and the immersion of it. I've noticed online quite a lot of criticisms that it was a bit of a slow burner, that the pacing, some people criticize the pacing of it as being rather slow. But on the other hand, it suited the pace of an experience in Thailand that is supposed to, well, on the surface was supposed to be relaxed, and things were supposed to be slow. But the key fundamental premise of this show, and I think of the entire 3 seasons of the show, is that what looks initially idyllic starts to get darker and darker, and the guests bring the kind of corruption of the outside world into this sense of paradise, this paradise style resort. And you have to remember that the title of the show is called The White Lotus. And a white lotus is if you look up the meaning of white lotus, it's obviously a flower, but has been attached to the idea of purity and enlightenment. But notice that the way that the white lotus grows is it grows in muddy water. So it's actually, in that sense, a product of corruption, quote unquote. That's the metaphor, that you've got a yin and a yang. You've got the muddy water that produces this wonderful flower of purity and enlightenment. But at the same time, is that flower all that it necessarily looks? Is it as pure and enlightened? Is it not got a sort of filthy soil underneath? So that's very much, I think, the theme of the premise of the show, sorry, the premise of White Lotus, and it was very much the theme, I think, of season 3 that we've just watched.
Yeah, and also there's of course quite strong Buddhist theme about mindfulness, this idea of the monkey mind, the monkeys. That interesting, I think, has kind of two kind of meaning. One is about the monkey mind, that we can't actually sort of switch off that inner dialogue. I don't know if people are familiar with mindfulness, but so I think the monkeys was a representation of that. But at the same time, I feel the monkeys had also slightly evil streak to them, so you didn't really know whether they were going to have any more power. Another thing that I thought was quite interesting was this about the revolver you see in all the scenes, and whether it's a Chekhov's gun, this idea of something is placed and then you don't know whether or not it is going to be used. And it's in many, it comes up first with Tim Ratcliffe about whether or not he's going to kill his family when he actually steals the gun that is then stolen from him. And then obviously with the Thai gentleman, the bodyguard the security guard, whether or not he's feel able to use the gun and impress that lady. But I feel it's quite tense. A lot of it, you sort of sit on your edge of the seat, kind of bit worried. But is he going to kill her? I mean, with him there, is he going to kill the family? Is that he's going to resolution? And another thing I also want to bring up is this idea of miscommunication. I think there's a difficult something is permeating the whole series, and particularly this season, is this idea that people are unable to communicate. So, and this could maybe be because of in Tim's case, maybe the idea of shame. He's embarrassed about if his wife finds out about that they in fact they are bankrupt because of the FBI raid, and she's not unable to communicate that. And it's the same with Rick and Chelsea, this miscommunication. How did you find that, but the Chekhov's gun and miscommunication?
Yes, well, the gun motif, of course, is key. So we're going to obviously give away a few spoilers. So, spoiler warning for those that haven't seen the entire 8 episodes. But towards the final episodes of the series, we have all this literally gunplay, if you like, playing around with Hitchcock called it the MacGuffin, the thing that's introduced into the plot that may or may not lead somewhere, and MacGuffin often leads nowhere. So the initial placing of the gun and the security guard trying to locate the gun, and who does find the gun and takes it away. So that particular threat evaporates. Of course, in the case of the Ratliff family, to be replaced with the threat of poisoning. So the father, first of all, tries to think about shooting himself, and then he thinks horrifically about trying to poison his own family, with the exception of his youngest son, who said he wasn't so much interested in material possessions. But in the end, tragically, and we think in the final episode that he unfortunately has killed his own son, and this is the deep tragedy of it. But in fact, it's not. So that whole story just resolves itself. But the real meat is actually in the final episode with the character Rick, who starts the gun war that we've known about and has built a sense of tension about right throughout the season, because the season opens with mayhem in the resort, which is a perfect metaphor, by the way, for the show. The idea that I mean, it's a lovely scene actually, where um, one character is in a meditation session and is told to shut out all sense of the world, to have this sense of peacefulness, and suddenly realizes that there's cracks in the air which sound like gunshots. And then the so-called guru quickly does a bunk and a runner, showing that the whole thing is actually a little bit of a facade. That it gives the resort gives the illusion of wellness, but actually there's a lot of danger in that location underneath, and that could actually be a wider metaphor for Thailand as well, actually, which we could maybe return to in this little bit later in this discussion.
Mike,
yeah, sorry.
So, Mike, why talk a bit about this metaphor, the Greek metaphor, or the Greek tragedy of you kill what you love? And I think it's coming in two instances. It's the first, obviously, between Rick and Chelsea, whereby he, in the end, sort of, again, spoiler, tragically ended up killing her because of trying effectively to save her. But and then with Tim Ratcliffe. That he's effectively killing his time inadvertently. I mean, I don't think he purposely put the rest of the milk there as to, sorry, the drink there for him to find, so that he couldn't probably foresee that the boy, or could he? I mean, it's a bit ambivalent, but there is this metaphor of killing what you love.
Yeah, to just come back to your idea before about miscommunication, one of the key things I think is that all the characters, when they're in the resort, are very much isolated, so that they can't really communicate with each other very well. I mean, they talk obviously, but they're not necessarily on the same level. So, for example, the very entitled character played by Patrick Schwarzenegger. He Saxon. He is very much trying to obviously get off with the women, but the women are operating on a different level to him. Certainly, the character Chelsea, and so the people are miscommunicating. They're not working together on the same level. Only really towards the end does he have a little bit more, but not much, but a little bit more understanding of. So he's seen towards the end of the show reading books about Buddhism that Chelsea had recommended him. But this actually is carried over into the cinematography and the visual look of the show. And this is why we've got the background that we have of the focus on the grass and the wet grass as our background, because that very much mirrors. I mean, it's actually almost mirroring exactly some of the key shots from the show. And if you look at the show very carefully over the 8 weeks, when the characters in the resort, they're shot with a very shallow depth of field. The cinematography has a shallow depth of field. In other words, only the figures themselves, the main characters, are in focus, and the background is out of focus. This compares to some films, for example, the films of Stanley Kubrick, who have a wide depth of field where both foreground and background are sharply in, you have a sharp image, sharply in shot. So in the White Lotus, it's complete opposite. There's a lot of blurry background with only sort of foreground figures or objects sharply in shot. And it's only actually when the characters step outside of the resort that that changes. So I think it's the idea that once you're in one of those sort of tranquil wellness resorts, you're sort of locked away from the rest of the world, but crucially as well from the rest of your fellow men and women. And so that is an interesting visual aspect that emphasizes what you were saying, Charlotte, about miscommunication.
the other thing, absolutely. And the other thing I also want to talk about is, as a psychologist, I'm also interested in miscommunication in terms of realization of trauma and also, on the inability of being resilient. So both Radcliffe's family, the Radcliffe family, and Rick and Chelsea are experiencing trauma, but their experience is quite differently. And in both cases, they're both hiding something from their families, respective families. And in Tim Radcliffe's is that he has gone bankrupt. In Rick's is that he wants to find the man who shot his father and ultimately kill him. Okay. But when things goes completely wrong, etc., their ability to be resilient to this is because in some sense both of men are sort of falling apart. Whereas we find with Tim, he has some sort of resilience in him in this that he's able to deal with situation in terms that he doesn't poison his family and he doesn't shoot. So he's able to kind of still have kind of resilience to not act out. Whereas in the situation with Chelsea and Rick, it's complete opposite. Rick has no resilience. He cannot cope with that anger despite sort of Chelsea trying maybe give him this mindfulness or trying to love conquers all, etc. Whereas he cannot deal with it, and that ultimately what I think what leads to this tragedy. And another thing that struck me and is this idea of Chelsea as almost like one of these women who loves too much, that she believes, and many I think women believe, that they can change a man, they can just enough love, or she's trying to make it seem that you have enough love here, you don't have to go after something. Yeah, you be fine, you're okay. And
Yeah.
ultimately still tragedy happens. What's your response?
Yes, yes. I mean, it's actually there in one of the lines in the episodes where she's trying to explain, I think, to Saxon the basis of her relationship with Rick, because Saxon, the miscommunication, he can't understand why she would be with someone like that, and she says that she is it's the yin and yang thing again. He is pain, and she represents hope. And so in many ways, these characters are quite heavily symbolic. And they are the yin and yang. If we go back to the whole sort of Buddhist backdrop, they're the yin and yang that contend throughout this series, the dark and light, pain and hope. And it's quite noticeable that throughout the series, we see shots of Buddha, or certain Buddhist gods, where they're Janus faced, which is the Latin term, where they're looking one is looking in one direction, one is looking in the other direction, and at the very end, that is mirrored in the deaths of Rick and Chelsea, in which for the first time ever, Rick's pain has been alleviated, and he's almost staring up at the sky as he lies there dead in the pond, with almost a beatific smile on his face, as if he's seen God. Whereas poor Chelsea is lying face down in the water in an opposite direction. So the idea that they're in opposite directions, and in some sense, her hope has, at the very end, has been transposed to Rick, who is finally liberated from his pain as a result of death. So it's pretty bleak message, but it's the idea that it's karma. So Rick is someone who cannot escape from his past, and he's locked in that karmic cycle. Chelsea tries to intervene, tries to create, and Rick is mourning someone that is gone, and not realizing that there's someone there right now that he could have love with. But he's unable to do it. There's a moment where we think he's transcended it, but he doesn't, and in the end, he's caught in that karmic cycle. Ratliff, Tim Ratliff, the businessman character, gets that moment of hope he could have gone down that path, but he gets that moment of hope, and it's the moment when he realizes that he had almost lost his son, and suddenly everything else just pales into insignificance. So he gets his own form of transcendence by realizing that whatever's going on with his business and the possibility of him going to prison, it's nothing compared to the loss of his son.
And hopefully they're able to communicate better after coming on the boat. Of
That's
course,
right.
we don't know, of
Yeah,
course,
we
what's
don't
happened.
know. It's left
Yeah,
hanging.
yeah,
But the idea that
yeah,
they may all be changed by their
yeah.
experiences, those at least who've lived and survived.
Oh, I want to talk a bit about the girls and the trio. It's quite interesting because it's something that actually remind me a bit of some of the Swedish writing about uh, girls or your old classmates, how people change. And I think initially, when the trio meet, it's like as if everything is fine, everything is normal, but then the old kind of presumably jealousies has come back to haunt them. Jacqueline as a Hollywood actress and was sort of paid for it all. So they are the ones that sort of almost expected to feel grateful for her generosity, and Kay to kind of she's also has you know certain sense of superiority coming from Texas, and maybe and this being Trump voter, and then but wanting still fit into the gang, and then Laurie, who as a lawyer, also struggling and hoping that maybe this, I think they all may be hoping for different things going to happen in this trip, but then with the various affairs, it's almost as if they're trying to escape their childhood or this, but at the same time, it sort of all comes back and haunt them. What's your opinion of the
Yeah,
ladies?
yes, it all comes back and haunts them. I mean, it's a little bit like, I mean, it's quite a nice touch in the early episodes of the season, where each of the three women, they each gossip about the other, behind the other's back to their friend, and it changes with each episode. So they're all gossiping about each other, and they do end up a little bit like jealous schoolgirls, jealous about oh, you've stolen my boyfriend kind of thing, is effectively the vibe that you get when these characters sort of pair off with various men throughout the season. But they're not trapped by their karma. Again, in their case, there is a form of epiphany, there's a form of revelation towards the end, and they manage to transcend that. Ultimately, by the Laurie character, who's the most embittered, understanding that in fact what transcends it is not so much anything they've done or not done to each other, but time and the fact that they've been together for so long. So she experiences that epiphany at the very end, whether as a plot point, whether it's a little bit too pat and neat, maybe, in terms of the final episode resolving that storyline, that's up for debate. But within the flow of the narrative, they do experience a form of transcendence. They recognize that the ultimate value is of their friendship, and in that sense, they leave the resort uh, with an equilibrium restored. That equilibrium had been knocked during the holiday, but it's now been restored and improved upon.
Mike Wright has mentioned also that he talks about this concept of identity, and it is maybe most prominent in this dialogue by Frank, a friend of Rick that he meets in Bangkok, where he talks about his changes to, particularly his love for Thai women, and then his self-identification now, possibly as a Thai woman, that is almost he becomes what he loves. Like he 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 likes them so much, so he becomes one himself. I don't know. Is that something you find in screenwriting? This idea of that you become what you love.
Well, yeah. I mean,
The,
he's there. He's wonderfully played by Sam Rothwell. He
yeah.
is it's more comic relief, I think,
Yeah.
that speech, and it's the idea that you think you know a friend, but actually it turns out to be entirely different. That they've changed a great deal, and he's obviously been on a
Yeah.
journey. But notice that as soon as he hooks up with his old friend, he sort of relapses into his
Mm.
old alcoholic,
Um,
womanizing ways. But yeah, again, it's that idea that that character has been on a journey in a sense that people can change. One of the aspects I think of the show is that identity is a prison,
yeah.
and that each are locked into their own identities, and it's only some of them that manage to transcend that identity and to leave their prison. So in a comic way, the Sam Rothwell character embodies that, but it's it's done in a very, very comic, outrageously comic
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. I thought it was a wonderful monologue, and I was but I was kind of amazed that he also was able to sort of give it in a sort of eloquent way. But in terms of identity, not someone else that is trapped his identity is this between Gattok and Lisa, this idea that he is, apologies if I don't pronounce his name, guys, that he is he has his profession. He's a security guard, so he's meant to be this tough guy, but actually he's not a tough guy. He's and also due to his religion, he's Buddhist. He's non-violent, and then he has to be brutal or like act do this shooting and but also to win the love of Lisa. So he also has to transcend his identity. He has to be someone who is not, if that makes sense. But he sort of does it in the end when he kind of when the lady who owns the hotel sort of asks him to shoot the Rick when he runs away, and he sort of then becomes a sort of hero. So that's also another example of people that cannot transcend. How did you find that?
Well, that touches on a really important aspect of this show, which is the way in which good characters can also be corrupted and actually fall prey to what the show called the monkey mind. You know, you have
Mm.
all these shots of cutaway shots of the monkeys in the trees surrounding the resort. And as you've mentioned before, Charlotte, the theme of the monkey mind. Now, just
Yeah.
think about there's two good characters through most of the season. There's two good characters. Essentially, the Lady Belinda who comes to the resort and starts to realize that she knows somebody who lives nearby and it has that moral quandary, the fact that he may be a murderer. There's her, and then there's also this security guard who's a very nice fella, but is under a lot of pressure to be live up to the sort of strand, I guess, of Thai culture of hyper masculinity, of being the tough guy, as symbolized by the boxing matches that we see throughout the season. But look what happens to both of those
Mm.
characters, the good characters, at the very end. They're corrupted by the pressures of the environment around them and of the bad karma of others. So the security guard, yes, ultimately gets the approval of the lady that he wants to date by becoming the bodyguard. But look what at the price of what he's had to do to
Mm.
achieve that. He's had to shoot a man in the back, essentially. That's what the show shows at the very end. When he's asked to take the shot, the man is walking away from him.
Mm.
And he's not threatening him, and yet he shoots Rick in the back. Now, again, yin and yang, it ultimately
Mm.
produces some sort of peace for Rick, I guess, but it's still a nasty
Mm.
act. While the Belinda character, who has, essentially been wrestling and not wanting to be bribed, in the end is bribed and paid off
Yeah.
to cover up a murder. So the price of her doing that is to walk away from the man that she had kind of could have set up a business with and could have
Mhm.
been her partner. So there's bad karma there as well. And the way in which, and interestingly, there's almost a satire there, the way in which the rich characters can infect the poor
Mm.
in such a way that the poor ultimately make bad karma choices that might
Yeah.
might benefit them personally. But that's in the show's mythology, that's the monkey mind. The monkey mind benefits individually, but the peace and tranquility and the equilibrium of the wider universe is corrupted.
Yeah, unfortunately, she sort of also does to him as to what was done to her in the previous season, where the lady just sort of well, she died, unfortunately, but she sort of left her. But yeah,
Yes,
so
that's right.
yes,
So bad acts, can create further bad acts
mm,
further down the line.
so yeah, so that's interesting. And yeah, but it's interesting also that she's one of the few people who wins on this episode. A lot of other they have this sort of. I feel as if they're leaving the sort. Some of them are slightly more, even more embittered and even more less relaxed than they came, so to speak. But another thing I wanted to move on to, so Thailand, which I think Thailand has a very interesting um, place in this because I mean one thing we both have been to Thailand together and in um, and one thing that struck me when I was in Thailand was this idea that the poverty lies on top of the rich. Like you live in this gated community and where you have all these facilities and it's wonderful and everyone's and then you stop 3 minutes outside and you're met with sort of poverty. It's very in Thailand. It's one of these where it's such a strong differentiation between the poor and the rich. They live next door, but they're miles apart. And as well as a Thai culture of slightly, it's a silencing, but maybe not being talking very open. But how was your feeling? And obviously you have been more to Thailand than I've been, but
Well, only once before. Yeah,
mm,
you're absolutely spot on. And it's interesting because the show is 3 seasons in, and
mm,
in many ways, the Thailand setting is the perfect setting for this kind of Buddhist karma type of show in which you explore the corruption under the White Lotus. It's actually a perfect setting because Thailand is such a raw society. For those of you who've never been, I mean, it's a really interesting country of contrast because you've got this very peaceful population that are that worship Buddhism, and yet you've got the extremes as well, of
mm,
violence, of poverty, and actually of outright danger in that
mm,
society. So it's a society of extremes. So it perfectly fits the themes of the White Lotus because again going back to the opening scene of
mm,
season 3, where you've got this opening in this paradise of wellness where the Indian guru lady is trying to say close off your mind from all outside
mm,
influences, but suddenly danger erupts right in the heart of the resort, and the facade is ripped open, and in fact the Indian guru lady, who's seen as some sort of repository of wisdom in the show, just does a runner from the fear of the gunshots. And of course, without bringing up exactly where and when this happened, we've experienced this directly, Charlotte, because we were staying in a resort in the neighboring sort of tourist spot, Phuket. And we were in this kind of White Lotus style resort. The branding is almost exactly the
mm,
same, the sort of the sort of insignia across against a white background. We won't mention the name of the resort, but it was in Phuket, and we were enjoying our holiday. And one night we were listening to a band. We were there with our 1.5-year-old son at the time. He was 1.5 years old. And we were listening to a band, and we suddenly heard a sort of commotion outside the walls of the hotel. So the walls of the hotel were quite big, and you were kind of shut
mm,
in, but you could hear street noises from the other side. We didn't think much of it. And then it was only gradually that we realized that in fact what had happened was a murder directly outside our hotel that we were staying
mm,
in a road that we had already
yeah,
walked down with our 1-year-old son in his pushchair. And the interesting thing was the Thai people never mentioned it to us. It was never discussed. It was never raised. It was there wasn't anything. The only way we found out was actually because we happened to, there was no internet in the hotel, rather like the mobile phones. But you could go on the internet in the hotel lobby. And one time, a day or so later, we went on the internet to check the news, and suddenly we got the local news coming up. And what had happened was that two Australians who were staying at our very hotel had gone for a walk down that road. It was two women, I think, and one of them had a bag, and two guys in motorbikes came shooting down the road and tried to steal the bag off one of these Australian ladies. She gave struggle and struggled, and she managed to resist for a short time, but eventually the guys grabbed the bag. And it was only after she had staggered a few more steps that apparently, according to the news, she discovered this huge wound in her torso. The guy had actually stabbed her with a blade, and I'm afraid to say that she died shortly thereafter. So it was a murder that did create news. I think it made international headlines
Yeah.
as well, but we were kept from it. And even sort of taxi drivers that were using, we would notice kind of police outside the hotel, and they didn't even let on to us because I think the idea was not to disturb the tourists.
Yeah.
But it's certainly, Charlotte, I'm sure you agree, you'll remember that it sums up the huge extremes of Thai society and the way that everything looks very serene on the surface, Buddhist calm, but underneath it can be pretty dangerous. What do
Yeah,
you
and
think of that?
there was also seen a sort of sense of the band played on. So yes. So we kind of, I sort of, we felt it something was strange, but we couldn't really pinpoint what the strange thing was. But it's like, but no one said something. Nothing was discussed because some people say that isn't it strange that the people is not talking anything, but that's what exactly what happened. No one said a word. We had no idea they were treating us as regular guests, and it was something that we had this happen outside, so we were in blissful. I mean, and maybe that is this idea that they want to, like what White Lotus took up, this they want people to stay cocooned in this almost like
Yes.
remove mobile phone, remove everything, so that you are away from life. And something that struck me now, that maybe it's a bit like sometimes you feel like between the rich and the poor, that rich people sometimes accused of living in a bubble, that they 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 are not able to identify with the struggles of the poor or something like that. I don't know. At least some of them. That's, I feel, something that's coming up again and again, is a theme in the White Lotus. That not the best to struggle, but sometimes, of course, the rich are seen as like a satirical characterization. But that was something, yeah. But as I say, but at the same time, I was very impressed by how guest friendly, how friendly the people were in Thailand. I mean, for example, they were looking after my son. They were very friendly at the same time as was this code of silence or code of not discussing, or at the same
Yes,
time.
that's right, Charlotte. And yeah, I mean, they would babysit our son when we wanted to go out. And you could say, well, look, people they were trying to not spoil people's holidays, not frighten them, let people have a lovely holiday. But at the same time, you also felt a little bit you were being cheated a little bit
Mm,
because maybe treated a bit like children.
mm,
And that idea that you shouldn't know what's going on, because it could have had an effect
mm.
on our holiday if we had been caught up in violence that we were unsure was
Yes,
happening. And it could have just been simple avarice to protect the Thai tourist industry. It was very interesting. I remember it was on the day we flew off. And we were waiting in the airport, and it was on the television screens that at the airport, in the lounge when we're waiting. They finally got the two guys, or they found somebody anyway
mm,
that they claimed were the perpetrators of the killings. And I do remember, this is the way it works over there, is
mm.
they paraded them on television, on national television. It was almost to sort of
Yeah,
say, tourists, we found
yeah,
them.
yeah,
Now,
yeah,
I don't know whether it was these
yeah,
guys or not, but I do know that and I haven't checked whether
yeah,
they were I presume they were found guilty, and if they were found guilty over there, they would be executed. So we can identify with the themes of the White Lotus and Thailand, and that yin and yang, and the Buddhism contending with the dark forces. It's absolutely on the nose of what Thailand is like.
But moving back to the episode, so basically, so a tragic ending, but at the same time hopeful, we hope. So what do you think is next sense for the season? So I've thought about sort of some places that they could go down. One could, of course, be a spin-off of what happens to these characters when they come back. There was something else. But also maybe I thought of other places that maybe they could go. I mean, I presume they might go where they have these resorts, but maybe I thought sometimes Mauritius, maybe.
Well, Charlotte, I have some news for you, and maybe this is the right place to end this. I read, now it is just a rumor, that yes, season 4 is planned, but wait for this, they're planning to do it in a Nordic resort.
Oh, wow.
So
That should be
very much
exciting.
your Swedish
Wow, that'd
thing.
be.
So it'll be sort of, instead of fire, if you like, in Thailand, it'll be ice.
It'll be Nordic noir, maybe. Yeah, that we definitely were eager to watch that. And so some final thought, so as I say, there was a great season. I think, among the best, I would say. I think I loved White Lotus to start with, and in some ways it sort of feels as if it's gone better and better. And a strong season and interesting character, and then we hope it continues in this way to maybe end it on this. And what about you? Do you have any final thoughts you can leave for our viewers?
Just say that it's worth a watch. It is a bit of a slow burner, but the episodes, if you soak, and it's one of those shows that you have to soak into it. You're not going to necessarily get a lot of incident in particularly the earlier episodes, but you sort of slowly soak into it, and it's actually extremely beautiful to look at. The cinematography is beautiful, and it's so lush. And so watch it on the biggest TV screen you can find. And as I say, I hadn't really been exposed much to previous seasons, and so I can honestly say that I enjoyed White Lotus season 3, and got a bit out of it. And hopefully, with the audience listening to this discussion, you've got a bit more out of it as well.
I hope so. Yeah, and definitely tune in to HBO's White Lotus. It's a great show and a great character to say. And as I say, I was sitting on my edge of my seat and couldn't wait next week to watch the next episode. So certainly nail biting as well. But well, thank you very much for following us. I hope you're following us next week, and you have a great week.